This is Geo Creations. This is part 3 of the cartooning exercise. Now I'm going to talk about the process of inking. Inking is more than just tracing. It has the powerful ability to help subconsciously inform the reader or viewer what is important in the images. Let's start by looking at these 3 blocks. You may have noticed that the inking on here doesn't look very good. The lines are straight and neatly applied, but something is off about the way these lines are thickened and thinned. The object in the farthest back has the thickest outlines. Thick outlines also lie on the details of the box and rather the boxes themselves. This doesn't do much to help inform the viewer about foreground, midground, or background, or it doesn't do much in the way of informing the importance or unimportance of the details. Now this trio of blocks does a much better job of implementing inking techniques. The foreground object has the boldest outline to draw the viewer's attention. The details have thin lines. The midground has slightly thinner outlines enclosing the shape itself, and the background, or the furthest block away, has the thinnest lines over its entire structure. I'm going to explain in further detail how this can be utilized in your art in an applicable way. So this is a piece of art from the great artist Frank Cho, a frequent illustrator for Marvel Comics, DC Comics, and his own independent comic strip called Liberty Meadows. I've selected this image today because it's an excellent example of virtuoso inking process. One of the things people mistake inking for is tracing. And while tracing is directly involved, that's an overly simplistic reduction of all that it provides. The inking in this image subconsciously informs the viewer about what is and is not important. The artist also suggests to the viewer where he wants it to look first. This picture of Brandy and her mutated pets is a great example of how these techniques are implemented. He's given a master class, essentially, on how to ink properly. If you take a look at the figure, there's a series of things that I want to discuss, particularly the idea of enclosure lines and contrast. Enclosure lines are the thicker lines that surround the most important objects, in this case, the animals and the main figure. When we discuss the thickness and thinness of lines, what we're talking about is line weight. The lines around the form of the figure, arms, shoulders, body, head, so forth, are thicker than you may see in the lines on the wrinkles or the stitching of the shirt. This is significant because it determines for us as a viewer that the figure is more important than the wrinkles of her shirt. If you look at the mutated dachshund at the bottom, you'll see that it also has enclosure lines throughout the image. But you'll also notice that the enclosure lines at the bottom have a thicker line weight. Line weight is often thicker at the bottom of figures and forms because it indicates shadow. You'll also notice that other lines, like the lines of the bark, are very, very thin. This indicates importance for the viewer. Those bark lines really aren't that important to overall understanding of the image. Because the human eye is naturally drawn towards contrasts, we all tend to look at the same thing first, the hair. The hair acts as a frame to focus on the human expression first and foremost. These inking techniques are very powerful at suggesting to the viewer at what order we should view the objects in. For example, we start with the hair because of the high degree of contrast of the black hair framing her facial expression. We track the thickness of the contour lines and look at the enclosure lines of the figure below. Lastly, we follow the curved eye movement to discover our bear playing the role of mad scientist. This movement through contrasting line is reinforced by the black button nose. I hope that after seeing this prime example of virtuoso inking technique, you'll begin to understand just how powerful line weight in inking can be. So, in review, make sure your enclosure lines have the greatest line weight of all your objects. After all, those contrasting lights and darks draw the attention of the human eye. Also, thin lines help minimize the importance of objects on your page. And lastly, inking is the last phase of your line work. So, this is your chance to neaten things up and clean up or erase your pencil marks. Good luck and have fun.